Wonderful and warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, everybody who's here, for getting up so early to be punctual. And thank you, everyone who is actually watching us on their computers or on their phones to actually pay attention. Everybody is looking right at the moment at BLM COP30, and we're going to be talking about scaling up nature-based solutions, pitfalls and potentials. Now, whilst we're doing that, we have a host. Amongst the hosts, we are supported by the German Federal Environmental Foundation. Alexander Bonde is already here. We're going to be talking about different aspects, but let me just first of all take a textbook explanation of what nature-based solutions are, and then we're going to be talking about the different applications. Nature-based solutions are actions to protect, manage, restore natural or modified ecosystems to address societal challenges like climate change, disaster risk, and water security. I could go on. That sounds very abstract. Now, in order to make it much more concrete, we have here one of the foremost experts of actually bringing peatlands to life again, Franziska Tanneberger, Greifswald Meyer Center. Thank you very much for being here. And then what is closer to us, well, apart from food maybe, than living somewhere. So that means that the built environment is very important for us. And we have two experts here, Ellen Organsky of the Yale School of Architecture, with many more things to do, and Niklas van Elsa, Atelier van Elsa here in Germany. Let me just sort of first of all kick off and say, yesterday we've had the lecture by Mr. Rockström, and again he said, yes, we are just at a point where we can get it done if we actually all stand together, and we know that nature-based solutions are a big part of it. Mr. Brunner, Alexander, why does your organization sponsor this talk about pitfalls and potentials?
Well, good morning. As the German Environmental Foundation, we are focused on innovations. And one of the important things fighting the climate change is doing new stuff, looking what high tech can do. But one of the most overlooked parts of the debate is what can our natural ally do? What can we do to use nature, to use ecosystems, to reduce CO2 and to store carbon? And that's the real important question, why we want to put on the spot on how do we use restoring wet ecosystems, and how do we use traditional materials like wood to store carbon. And sometimes the biggest innovations are things you know from your tradition, and nature-based solutions are a big part of the solutions, and therefore we're happy to host these sessions because we see a lot of potentials in restoration of peatlands, in storing carbon in its natural habitat, so to say, at the same time being part of the solution concerning the biodiversity crisis we're facing. And on the other hand, we're talking about a lot of fascinating materials that we can use in a very modern interpretation of construction. It opens doors to circular economy, it opens doors to reducing the biological and ecological impacts of the building on the construction business. So therefore, nature-based solutions are the biggest innovation we can follow concerning climate change, and on the same time bringing progress, bringing new business perspectives for small and medium enterprises. So therefore, why not go for the solutions that solve more than one problem?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alexander. And the German Federal Environmental Foundation, of course, is an instigator, a supporter. You don't create projects yourself, but you support what you think has a great impact. Now, Franziska, to introduce you probably in this context is carrying coals to Newcastle, to use a bad word. We're not going to talk about coal anymore. Well, taking Pete to Scotland?
No.
Okay, anyway, now, Franziska, you're sort of one of the world's foremost experts on sort of getting the peatland to do its function again. But you've been going on for a number of years, fortunately. So for you, probably, the question of scaling up your efforts rather than, or taking it into the audiences here and for everybody to know, is very important. Where are we now with re-wetting lands that have intentionally, by human beings, made to be dry?
Yeah, we are still lagging behind. And I mean, we have heard already that we have main allies in ecosystems and nature to support our overarching societal goals and the pressing crisis we have. And I would say we have the forest, and I don't want to play the peatlands against the forest. The forest is really crucial, but we do have the peatlands, and people still tend to overlook them, to underrate the importance. And just maybe to set it into perspective, on a global scale, we have 30% of our land is forest, is covered by forest. It's only 3% that is peatlands. But then the carbon that is stored in the peat soils, so these big layers of organic material covering these lands, is double the amount that the forest trees biomass stores actually. So, and then we have the choice: do we keep the carbon in the ground? What the natural peatlands are doing, and then they sequester more CO2 and bring it into the ground, or do they release it? On a global scale, 15% of our peatlands are drained. They are no longer really living and healthy. In a country like Germany, it's more than 90%. So especially here, we have really the responsibility to act. I'm very happy that Germany is starting to do a lot of things now in the previous legislative period and now. And on a global scale, looking back, you mentioned Belém and the Climate COP already. We are starting to launch a peatland breakthrough, bringing together all countries behind science-based targets for global protection of peatlands, restoration of peatlands, and wise use. But there's still a lot of things to be done.
Thank you very much. I was looking at my papers in order to find your fantastic quote. And there it is, because that is wonderful. We need sustainability to support a lasting future on this planet. This is words that you've been using. And then it comes, but it's also something pretty abstract. And I think a lot of these issues are that we need to translate into everyday life in the real world. Maybe you could later on add how you also take along the people that are impacted by the change, again, of the same soil that has been dried and now it's going to be re-wetted. But that's a second point. First of all, let's get to the area where we all have a common ground. We all have a home. We all live in a house. Some own a house, but that's a different issue. So building is incredibly important. And Alan Ogansky, you actually have something beautifully here in Germany, in Berlin, called Bauhaus Earth. Now, it seems there are two notions that are brought together. Bauhaus, very strict, very conceptualized, and Earth. How do the two fit together, and in how far are they nature-based solutions?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question to consider how we can create synergies between dense urbanization and forest peatland health. And those synergies are really critical because we have a systemic problem where at once we need to unpack all of the kind of path dependencies that are associated with global trade and global activity, industrial activity, and all the transport systems that connect them that make building right now in that framework cheaper. But we also need to expand our system boundaries. So as architects, we need to consider much broader criteria for how we design. And it really has to start with strong interdisciplinary transsectoral relationships between forests, natural systems, peatlands, how they function ecologically, and how we create demand for products to make buildings, because we have to build for 2.5 billion people in the next 20, 25 years, and that will have a huge impact. It will breach the planetary boundaries that Dr. Rockström is speaking of. So I think to understand how we can make building, we have to understand how we can have a deep, coordinated relationship with the protection, regeneration of natural systems. And we can't really talk about meeting housing demand, for example, without really developing those strict, careful, rigorous relationships between the supply from natural systems, the sustainable and regenerative that actually improves these natural systems, and healthy convivial urban housing.
Sounds absolutely fantastic. And of course, looking at Germany, right at the moment, there is a lack of a lot of housing, especially in urban areas, urbanized areas. Maybe you would have a solution that would be more on the cheap side, because you know, the financial aspect, which we will cover later on, is always something like, you know, we have great ideas, but can it be put into practice and paid for? Which makes me turn over to Nicola. And Nicola, your atelier Fanelsa has a number of notions on the website, which I'm not quite sure that everybody here in this room or wherever they're watching us is that familiar with. You're talking about commoning, but on the other hand, you're also, the pictures that one sees, you're using materials, or in your projects, materials are being used that we would traditionally have used 500 years ago. I've seen straw, I've seen wood, of course, being used as building materials, materials that we consider to be natural, biological. Is that the sort of big answer for the future?
I think it's definitely an ambition to put what we heard previously into practice. So, and there we can use the term of commoning. So the materials like wood or reed from re-wetted peat can be used in the building environment. And for me, as an architect working mostly in the countryside, here around Brandenburg, it's very important that these materials can also be experienced in buildings, and most importantly in common buildings, like of the community. And to give you an example, we are currently designing a fire station. So that's, let's say, a very ordinary, normal building, but it's very important for the local community. And this fire station, it will be completely built from timber, and it will have a facade made from paludi materials from reed. So you will have a thatched facade and materials in the inside wood. And this building will be very important because the community on an everyday basis will use that building and experience these materials.
Sounds absolutely fascinating, and lovely that you have a couple of projects that you can share with us. The question is it feasible to do building like that when you are inside a city, or is this very much a rural bound concept? The commoning, i.e. we're working together.
Yes, I mean, that's definitely applicable here in the city. I mean, of course, you need, let's say, also the system to make that possible. For example, a housing cooperative, of course, would be very much more open to incorporate new materials coming from the paludi side. But when we look at wood, I mean, that's far more established already in the German market, at least.
As we were talking earlier, Alexander, Niklas, I'm sorry, I was in the Italian way. So Niklas shared with me, we've been doing it sensibly for hundreds of years, and then we've had 80 years in which we sort of created a lot of deserts of concrete. Why have you, as an organization, as a federal organization or sponsored by the federal system, decided that that is something that you need to support, that you need to instigate, that you need to sort of put a limelight, a spotlight on?
Well, our mission is to support innovations that have the possibility to solve ecological problems. And our emphasis is on business models and technologies. And the question of climate change needs all hands on deck. So therefore, for us, it's important to see what can we achieve in storing carbon. And the construction industry has a lot of potential in that. If we see how much construction we need as a society, it makes a huge difference what kind of materials we produce on the way. And using the potentials that we do have in our forests, that using the storage potentials of wood, and at the same time getting better in using those materials has huge potentials in reducing CO2 emissions on the way. Cement is one of the big producers of CO2. Fascinating material, but a problem ecologically. And so we have to reduce CO2 production in the cement industry, but if we have this possibility to substitute it with wood, that's a huge ecological benefit, and it works in the market, as we can see. So therefore, we are financing several projects in that area. For us, it was important. We have a long tradition in building small homes with wood, but we had a lot of hesitation by big construction to use wood. So therefore, we started financing projects for wooden skyscrapers. So you could really see that lumber is not only for the small 1-2 family house, but you can build big construction.
Yeah.
You can build skyscrapers. One of the big skyscrapers in the Hafen City in Hamburg right now is built with wooden structure. So you can really see it works, and you can see it works in the market. It actually is a business case to build, and it's not something for a small niche. So it can really play a big part in transforming a part of the construction industry. So that's kind of the projects we are looking for, that you can really see and learn from, that the local fire brigade gets to know that you can build with wood and it's not burning down. One of the big wrong assumptions concerning the materials. And therefore, we need those kind of projects for us as a society to get back in touch with the benefits of those materials. And from what we are seeing, we're on a good track.
Perfect. Use, reuse, and finance we're going to talk about in a second. But let me first of all go to Franziska, because she's got something in front of her which you may or may not see, but I'm quite sure she's going to raise it in a second. We're talking about building materials. Now that looks like material that can be used, and that's made of peat.
No, the peat is to remain in the ground, because that's the carbon that is stored.
Good.
But this is the peatland plants. They grow on top of the peat soil. And what is really fascinating about these plants, we always look at the above ground part of a plant, the trees, the grasses, but they have a similar amount of biomass below ground, roots basically. And they bring the carbon, they fix CO2, they convert it, and then they bring the carbon into the soil. And because of the waterlogging in peatlands, it's kind of covering these roots and protecting them from decomposition. So they stay not alive, but they stay in good shape. And then they actually form the peat, and they bring permanently then new carbon into the soil if we let the peatlands do what they did for millennia already. So we do not need in a way to have like air capture of CO2 or whatever, because peatlands have really proven that they can do it themselves. And then from the above ground material of the plants, we can harvest it also annually, because the peat is from below ground material. And then we have heard already about thatched roofs. This is Phragmites, reed, a very common plant all over the world. And I also live in a house with a thatched roof. It's very nice to live in such a house. And from this plant, you can also do this kind of insulation panel, for example. This is also made from reed, or this kind of construction plate that can be used. So this is just small examples that we have already. And what is really exceptional about it, so we heard already about the substitution that we can make. Yeah. But then, in addition, if we use peatland plants from paludiculture, paludi materials, we reduce emissions from the soils, because they are wet again, they are re-wetted, and there's a value chain connected to it. The soil itself can sequester again CO2, so that's another additional value. We have the substitution, and if it is long-term materials, we have also storage in a building, so at least for a few decades maybe. And this is really a combination of climate benefits that we have, and then we have not yet spoken about the co-benefits of these wet ecosystems. We have biodiversity, we have cooling effects in the landscape, we have purification of water, groundwater storage. So there's a lot of things connected to it that we are just starting to see now.
Sounds absolutely fascinating. It sounds also like this triple or even quadruple win that you could have. Seeing that the title of the conference is Falling Walls, which walls have already fallen? This is not the last round, but which ones do you really need to sort of push down? Is it what's in people's minds, like that's something we don't want to touch? Or is it outside of perception and therefore we don't think about it?
It's a lot about the minds. It's about a paradigm that we have now, that we need to have a dry soil for farming. And this is not, if you look back in history, if you look at other continents, it's not said that the soil needs to be dry for successful farming. But at least in Central Europe, our understanding is now the soil first needs to be dried and then we can start farming. But we have really very highly productive plants that grow in the wet ecosystems that we could use. And I think this is one of these paradigms that should fall. And then I think the really nice thing is that, I mean, it's nice to push a wall down, but you need to offer something behind it. And we often compare the peatlands to burning fossil coal, because in so many countries we are now phasing out the use of coal as a material, as a fuel. And similarly, we need to phase out the drainage of peatlands. But then for those people who did the farming before, we can also offer that they continue farming, so they don't have to fully shift to something different.
So the social aspect is looked after, you've sorted that, but it's probably taking time to convince people.
Yes, because all our funding systems, our common agriculture policy in the European Union, a lot of legal stuff is all directed currently towards drainage of peatlands.
Yeah, I'm quite sure that that's a story that both of you have encountered, sort of legal frameworks that have been established in the traditional building era have to be shifted because of your new ideas. Ellen, I've just been asking you, how can we sort of solve issues like in Germany, and once we have you, Niklas, sort of playing the rural area, let's focus on cities. How can we come to grips with a housing crisis, i.e. build more buildings, in a nature-based and in a future-oriented way, when everybody says, oh, that's too expensive?
Yeah, housing cost has just given us a new mayor in New York City who has promised housing to the whole population at an affordable rate, which is going to be a challenge for him, but we, of course, support him. I think we have to redefine the economics of housing, frankly. As an example, the farmers who might have new distributed economies in Greifswald and in the peatlands, or foresters, people who are doing logging, regenerative harvest, they are also people who need economic growth, and that allows them to create housing. We have a complex of very, I would say, rigid policies. They're different for each country or region, but they're also not flexible enough to allow evaluations of how much environmental impact might happen if we're going to work in a place, or should we maintain the 20th century zoning codes that limit the densities that we hope to increase through good housing policy. And so I think, not to go back to this point, but I think it's a really systemic problem. You have to create the economies that can produce the materials that create livelihoods for people in who live in the natural systems that we're trying to restore. You have to actually create a whole new building sector that can adjust to the kinds of material systems and assemblies and structures that we've been talking about. You have to create the policies that educate policymakers and regulators, but also unleash these new potentials. And so it's a very complex economic calculation. You asked about how can we make it cheaper. What is cheap? How do we put a value on the loss of species? How do we understand that the regeneration of a natural system may create long-term cost benefit? If we only look at the narrow modeling of economic cost, immediate costs, and short-term life cycle costs, we won't actually understand how to unpack this really challenging set of systemic problems. So I would say, I think we have to have a coordination of new policy, new finance systems, incentives, as well as some restrictions. And we have to work really closely, as I said earlier, with the places and the people who will supply those materials to the building sector to make housing. So we're actually rebuilding an economy around bio-based and nature-based solutions.
Perfect. Now, I suppose you need to quadruple yourself in order to get the good news out. Niklas, you've been mentioning sort of the building of this particular house for the fire brigade as a common undertaking. Let's go a bit more into cities, and you said it's doable in cities. I fail to see how. Could you educate me?
Yes, maybe first I want a little bit also to connect to what I
Please.
said before. And I think we can see now that we have the policymakers in place. The understanding is there on the peat. We see upcoming materials and this. But of course, we also need to look at the people and the systems, the institutions building, for example, housing, and we also have to push them, let's say, to say, okay, we also want to be part of this. We want to have this shared kind of understanding of this possible future. And Ellen was also speaking that it's really also happening in a specific locality. So for example, here we are now in Berlin-Brandenburg, and for me, this is a really specific bioregion. And the term of bioregion then can help us also to understand the region as it is, but also to connect to other bioregions on a global level in an exchange of knowledge. And coming to your question on the urban condition, of course, we will look more at multi-story building and retrofitting, extending, or new buildings. And then, of course, we come back to regulations and, for example, especially fire regulations. But we don't need to see them as a limiting factor, but more as something we can also design and in a way make beautiful. And in the sense, currently our regulations are not beautiful because they are kind of limiting of what we can do. And if we kind of design them in the way allowing these new materials to come in, I think that can be much better.
Twice this week I've heard at different conferences that we need to make a new narrative, that it's not just green, but that it's sort of future-oriented, and that sort of transformation needs to be core. Now, that's a high demand in order to sort of take people along. How do you, on a one-on-one basis, convince the people that you work with that that's the right pathway? And before you answer that, ladies and gentlemen, after his answer, I'd like to sort of invite you to put questions to the panel, because we need 10 minutes at the end to lay out the future path. So, Niklas, how do these talks work?
Yeah, maybe this comes back also to this notion of the bioregion, that we really need to take all these stakeholders who are present and together weave them and form this kind of concept. So it's really important that if we see these materials, that they come from a nearby peat, that I, for example, as a craftsman, can go there with my children and can experience how this is. And then I also understand the importance of these materials and how to use them at a building site. And then, of course, it's often overlooked that the standard materials, they are really not nice to work with. So if you have been on a construction site, often they are like very cold and wet. I mean, probably you just look outside the building here, but it's really not a comfortable construction site, and you deal with materials who have like are really not nice to work with. And if you then take these new bio-based materials, you want to touch them and you want to use them, and I think that's important.
I always have a romantic picture in my mind right at the moment, but of course we need to combine many aspects. Certainly the romantic aspect can be a incentive, but then it needs to be, can we do it? Do we have the skills? Will enough people buy in? And now, ladies and gentlemen, your questions to our fantastic panel, to our very knowledgeable people here, you all seem to be very happy and very relaxed. Philip, would you mind waiting for the microphone, please? Yeah, I'm quite sure we can hear you, but then everybody else can also hear.
Thank you very much. Philip Gerber from the Technical University of Munich. So I run the venture lab. So we're trying to, create new businesses to go after global problems. And thanks a lot. I really love the discussion. And we've work a lot on regenerative agriculture. I really miss what you're constantly trying to evoke is to say the economic and the, so to say, social aspects of this. Because we've seen, I've fought in climate change for years, and we've seen it's a total failure if you don't. You have to be it. And I wonder whether you underestimate nature. Because I give you an example. We're going into an enormous problem with these monocultures. They are not resilient enough in the new thing. So why don't you put productivity and food security in the context, and we can have it all at the same time. We can also at the same time obviously restore the soil, restore biodiversity, because it's actually critical for resilience. And this kind of resilience aspect and this productivity aspect, why don't you know? And then it addresses, the small people.
Yeah.
Please, Alan, take it away.
No, I think that's a really important piece. I mean, we tend to work in these silos of disciplines and sectors, and we invest in the energy sector or a particular product or technology. But what we're not doing is combining the obvious network or integration of health, human health, of food systems, of forest and wetlands, peatlands, and natural systems. We're not understanding how those work potentially in synchronicity and synergy. And without that set of relationships and the balancing and testing across bioregions, not across political boundaries, but across biologic and ecosystemic boundaries, we can't really address that kind of coordination that you're describing. And so I think one of the things that it happens that education is a really fundamental thing. I think we can hit a generation which is poised right now to try to solve these problems. We just finished an regenerative agricultural high school building in our practice, and we asked the students what they thought of it, and they knew where the materials were coming from. They could identify them on a map. That's the first thing they really need to understand. And we asked them what they liked most about the building, and we hoped it was about the natural light or the spaces. And what they said was that the building smelled good. Entirely timber and bio-based building. And so I think there's the emotional, social, political integration of all of these goals that we have, but a coordination among those sectors. And that's what we're really not seeing. That's why regulations are too binding, too controlling, why finance is too limited in its focus. And that educational process runs across all generations.
Thank you very much, Franziska.
Maybe a brief addition. So when it comes to peatlands, it's not that simple, because currently we have a partly high-intensity dairy production, beef production on drain peatlands. And we would stop that, and we would then produce bio-based building materials on it. So we need also a shift in our land use. And we need to talk about, I would say also an elephant in the room, nutrition. And that brings us then to a really, I think, critical topic, but also a topic that is very sensitive to many people.
Thank you very much. And by the way, just to pick up your argument from yesterday and referring to Rockström's speech saying, the two main pillars are, of course, our food systems and the energy systems. But what we're doing here is we're actually looking at where there are already solutions in place and under which circumstances they can be rolled out or increased, which is why if there are two questions. So you have, yes, the gentleman there, and then we hand the microphone to first. Quick introduction. Your name is?
I'm not really related. I'm in a relationship with an architect. That's why I'm asking. What I see is that more and more it goes into modular buildings nowadays to make it fast. Are your solutions being implemented in a way that it is solving the problem in the near future or more in the long term?
Thank you very much for that question. And can we hand the microphone to the first row to a gentleman called Jörg?
Jörg Hefer, we've just founded a small circular economy startup. And my question is related to kind of system thinking. And let's say we know from the UK that in the 17th century they have almost deforested their whole land when building their fleet. And the question is, have we estimated, let's say, how much wood we need and what would it take then to merge that into peat and also go with all the other technologies we have? Because I think we need to have a balance among all to do that transition.
I would say that...
Please, you go ahead.
Well, I think that's a really important question. I don't think we can create an entirely nature-based solution given how much industrial consumer construction waste we've created. And so we have to coordinate the technosphere and the circular economy with the biocircular economy. And without those two things, the systems won't work, I believe. I think there is enough wood. We've done studies of the capacity of global forests, as an example, to produce primary structural material. But it really requires us to coordinate the work. We can't just have simply plantation forests for industrial purposes. We have to understand regenerative, ecological silviculture, how to actually harvest the forest to improve water quality, reduce wildfire mitigation, et cetera, store more carbon, and see what kinds of species are coming out of that process and innovate in architecture and building to use those species, and then coordinate with the flows of waste that are coming out of our everyday activities as humans to create very complex hybrid systems that join technosphere and biosphere in a productive way.
Quick strengthening of your argument or pinpointing two aspects. Well, we do have a hell of a lot of material hanging around.
Yeah.
Old material that's no longer used and then lands on some landfill rather than actually being put to new purpose. So the question of circular economy and getting it not just into our minds as a nice concept, but as a practice to do would be quite important. And apart from that, you said the technosphere. If I build something new, and that might be, Nicholas, a question for you, would you actually accompany that with a KI clone or just a normal clone, knowing what you put in, and then you can use it again in 10, 20 years if the needs and the demands to that building are shifting? So maybe Alan and Nicholas both, and not forgetting your question.
Yes, I think that will become the standard, that there will be like in terms of product regulations and in terms of passports for buildings and materials. I think that soon we will see that happening when new buildings are introduced. And
that refers to the question of the gentleman over there. So what time period are we talking about?
Yes.
Soon, you said soon.
Yes, soon. That's on the way, and it's been implemented. And of course, policymakers are giving too long gray periods, let's say, of adaptation. So I think this needs to be reduced. And in terms of modular, I mean, this is already happening. Let's say if we look at straw or if you look at hempcrete, we see in Europe already countries like France being really 5 years ahead of us in terms of scaling up bio-based solutions.
Alexander, you need to tell me when you want to get in, please. I'm right at the moment. I'm sort of, but Alan, the question of reusing what we already have used, including concrete.
Yes. Well, there are probably many uses for concrete that we haven't considered. Right now, it's quite a low technology transfer down, where we're using it for crushed aggregates for, road beds and things like that. I think the important thing to remember is the biosphere has already been contributing to the waste flows that we currently face. In the U.S., 30% of the wood that goes into a construction site comes out of the construction site in a dumpster before the building is even occupied. So those kinds of losses are things that we can take advantage of, we can exploit. As a sort of force multiplier. We're making carbon storing materials that already have their embodied energy has already been expended, and we can integrate those into new structural products, and that's really novel. And that goes to this question of modularity, which is really something about creating legible systems that can be predictable and repeatable, not just boxes that are on trucks, but rather how we think about assemblies so that they're legible, because if we can articulately put them together in a factory, dismantle them to some degree, take them to a site and reassemble them, we can also dismantle them at the end of their lives. So design for disassembly, as Nicholas is saying, is an incredibly important thing. And the last thing I'll say about that is, as architects, we not only have to design for the disassembly of the building, but we have to develop scenarios for the reuse of those components in some 60, 70 years in the future. Because if we don't do that and all we do is say we can take it apart, that doesn't really answer the question.
Thank you. Alexander, you have a carte blanche.
Now, I wanted to add that those two questions lead us to very important aspects, because sometimes it's better a wall is not falling, and you use your old wall
Well, in building, certainly, yeah.
and add to the 4 stories another 2 stories in a modular way. And the materials we are talking about are perfect for adding to existing buildings. And I think one of the most interesting things is to see how the industry is evolving in using old buildings, new parts of the building, and I think that's the way we have to go, because if you look at the construction industry, it makes more than 50% of the waste in Germany, and reducing the waste and prolonging the use of our old buildings is one of the key factors concerning reducing the CO2 footprint of the construction industry.
Thank you. Franziska, I would like to sort of leave what we've heard and sort of go on to the global rollout of the ideas. A lot of your work has taken place in Germany, but then you, with your work, are also coordinating with colleagues. I've seen pictures from a conference where we had representatives from Asia, from Africa, etc. So the issue is out there, but it's not filtered down. So, how do you coordinate with your colleagues so that the conservation or the recreation of peatlands is important? And how do they, in their environment, filter it down as an idea, as an ideal?
Both. Yeah, first, to coordinate, there is a big demand for global coordination on these things, because the challenges are similar. The level of knowledge that we have is similarly poor in some respects, and it's not that we in Europe are always doing better than others. So just 2 examples, we have calculated that we are underreporting substantial amounts, up to 90 megatons of CO2 equivalents per year in the European Union from drained peatlands, because our inventories are not really good with respect to peatlands, and also generally the knowledge where the peatlands are. So there is something where we bring together knowledge. We have a global peatlands initiative coordinated currently by United Nations Environment Program. We did in 2022 a first ever global peatlands assessment, really an assessment report where the peatlands are. We brought together researchers from all over the world. And as Greifswald-Meyer Center, we are also really at the core of it, because we run a global peatland database where we bring together all the data. And this is also what we actually both together will bring to Belém, to the climate conference. We have joint events there as well on peatlands, because it's still a big necessity to talk about these things and to connect between people. And then the challenge is equal, and I think also to make it less abstract again, to how to convince people actually. We need examples on the ground. Otherwise, it's a lot of nice talking.
Yeah.
And that's why I think what Germany is doing at the moment is really demonstrating leadership in this respect, because we have several, 10 in total, projects funded over 10 years now, because it's not happening by itself. There's no market that will sort this out by itself. So you need state-funded projects actually to create such examples, and then people can drive around in the landscape, they can look at it, they can talk to farmers who make a living from it already. And this is something that we, as a scientist, for example, we cannot convince. So you need a farmer to talk to another farmer about it. And then the second thing is it's about value chains, basically. And I mean, we can try to push it from the soil, from the peat soil, from the forest soil, but we need somebody at the other end asking for this kind of biomass, for this kind of products. And that's where we need industries in it, big businesses. And this is an alliance of pioneers that we have created 2 years ago. It's really pioneering work. We have it now in Germany. We try also to talk about that and to make it as a maybe template for other countries. We found that there's a big interest in big companies here in Germany to invest in it, to produce own pilot products, and then to scale it up. And I have one of these pilot products. This is just packaging material which is now out there with 100,000 of examples to just bring in permaculture biomass into it already. We have also building companies joining it, but I did not bring a big door here, for example. It was too heavy. But this is what we need on the other end of the chain, actually, to make it then running.
And I just yesterday heard an interview by the representative of the carton, not paper, but the carton industry, saying we're almost at 100% recycling rate. So just to throw that in. Now, I'm looking at the time, and we've got to get out here punctually. So this is the last round, and the last round usually asks the question, which walls still have to fall in order to get there. And each and every one of you has round about a minute to tell us or to share with us which wall you are pushing down right at the moment. Niklas, all clear? Which walls are you pushing down rather than putting them up?
Yes, so speaking as an architect, I mean, I have clients, and when these clients are coming to me and asking, okay, I would like to use these building materials, I think we need to bring them on a scalable level, and also we need to certify them, and we need to approve them. We need to educate the craftsmen in using them. And if we all tick these boxes, we will also get building materials on an equal cost level of similar products.
Thank you very much, and also for involving the financial issue. I will sort of move from my point of view to the right, but of course this got nothing to do with politics, just optics. So Ellen.
I'm going to go to the root of the matter, no pun intended. I think we need more science education, and that means for adults as well as our children, because I don't think we can do any of this if we don't have an educated electorate, population, to change the necessary policies and laws and educate around behaviors, really. And I see that people are educated very closely within their own discipline, but they don't really understand the sort of broader scientific implications that determine the outcomes here.
Very quickly, big difference between Germany and the US?
I would say Germans are, God, I'm going to get in trouble for this. Germans are better educated, more broadly educated as civilian populations and building sector
But there's
workers.
still work to be done.
There's a lot of work to be done, especially in the advancing countries that are really going to make change.
Thank you very much. And now the two of you have to fight it out. Who's going to go first? Who's going to go last? I think Mr. Bonde should have the last word.
Exactly, and I will be very brief. I think there are many walls, but one is really very emotional that we need to understand. And then with we, I mean the people owning peatlands, farming, managing peatlands, that it's sometimes better to do differently than generations before. And this is actually land that grandfathers, grandmothers of these people drained with heavy, engagement, and it was at high costs. And now to do differently and to accept again that we have wetlands in our landscape, I think that is something that is really very crucial in the mindset, and this is a kind of inner wall that we need to tear down.
And let's quickly remember that we need to look at peatlands because their capability of keeping carbon inside is just enormous and fantastic, and you continue your work. Thank you. Mr. Bonde.
Well, I think one wall we keep hitting is the wrong stereotype that green tech, climate change, nature is costing us. And I think this wall has to fall, and we have to realize that working with nature, working for a good climate is the best business we can do.
Wow, that's absolutely fantastic. What do we do with the 1 minute and 40 that we have left? I think just as a conclusion, first of all, I would like to thank you all for sharing your expertise and for also looking at it from an Eagle's point of view. We wish you three a lot of energy in all the projects that you're involved in. And Mr. Bonde, for you to keep pushing in the right direction, for always having enough money to sponsor the right things. And let's keep in mind, we're not doing that for nothing. We're doing it for a concrete, better life for individuals, but maybe also for the survival of humanity. I'm not talking about survival of the Earth. We all know the Earth will survive, no matter what we do, no matter how hot it's going to get. But if we're looking at our children and grandchildren, I wish that all your concepts will take root as soon as they can. In a sense, thank you very much. And I send you off with 30 seconds to go. You have a little bit more time for your coffee now. See you. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.